Welcome. This is a spoken rendering of an essay examining Gregory of Nyssa's 4th century Soteriology through the lens of the biblical promise plan. Gregory of Nyssa, writing in the late 4th century, constructed one of the most ambitious systems of redemption in early Christian history. Confronted by Arian, Eunomian, and Apollinarian controversies, he sought to safeguard both the full deity and the full humanity of Jesus Christ. Yet in doing so, he translated the biblical narrative of salvation out of its original Hebraic, relational, and covenantal matrix into Greek ontological and metaphysical categories. At the foundation of Gregory's thought stands Platonic realism. For him, human nature is not a collective description of individuals, but a singular, real, universal substance, an archetype in which every particular human being participates. Whatever happens to that universal nature therefore affects every individual who shares in it. Gregory grounds this framework in a distinctive reading of Genesis chapter 1, verse 27. He divides the verse into two acts of creation. First, God created the ideal, non-gendered, incorporeal, immortal, universal human nature. Second, foreseeing the fall, God added physical differentiation, male and female, animal-like bodily organization, and mortality. The fall itself is not primarily legal rebellion but ontological disease. Sin is a poison mixed into the universal human substance, subjecting it to passions, corruption, and death. Because every individual participates in that single diseased nature, mortality automatically spreads to the entire race. The remedy must therefore also be ontological. The Eternal Son assumes this diseased universal human nature and unites it to his own divine nature. Through a process Gregory calls transfusion, the divine life deifies the assumed flesh. Because of Platonic solidarity, that deification begins to affect the entire human race. Yet if the Incarnation already heals human nature, why must Christ die and rise? Gregory answers that the divine life must penetrate death itself. By descending into the separation of soul and body and then reuniting them, Christ injects a physical resurrection principle into the universal human substance. Alongside this metabolic model, Gregory places a dramatic version of the ransom theory. Humanity, having freely surrendered to sin, became the lawful property of the devil. God, being just, cannot simply seize his creation by force. He therefore offers Christ as a ransom of infinite value. To make the transaction possible, the divinity is veiled beneath human flesh, the bait of mortality hiding the hook of immortal deity. When death swallows the bait, the hidden divinity shatters the gates of death. Gregory even claims the deception ultimately heals the devil himself, purging malice from his nature. The sacraments then serve as the physical means by which the universal deification is subjectively appropriated. Baptism joins the believer to Christ's death and resurrection. The Eucharist functions as a literal antidote. Just as corruption entered through physical food in Eden, incorruption is communicated through the physical body and blood of Christ, which, like leaven, transforms the entire human lump from within. The logical climax of the system is Apocatastasis, the universal restoration of all rational beings. Because Christ assumed the single, indivisible human nature, the permanent loss of even one individual would leave a portion of Christ's own body permanently diseased. Therefore, every soul must eventually be purified, even if that purification requires ages of post-mortem refining fire. Evil, being only a privation of good, cannot endure forever. When this magnificent structure is measured against the inductive, text-immanent center of Scripture, the single progressive promise plan that begins in Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, is formalized with Abraham in Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 3, is secured to the house of David in 2 Samuel chapter 7, reaches climactic expression in the new covenant promised to Israel in Jeremiah chapter 31, verses 31 through 34, and is fulfilled in Jesus of Nazareth while the calling of ethnic Israel remains irrevocable according to Romans chapter 11, the displacement becomes unmistakable. The concrete history of Israel, the Sinai covenant, the Abrahamic land promises, and the Jew-Gentile distinction of the New Testament are largely erased. They are replaced by an abstract cosmic drama centered on a universal human substance. The imago Dei of Genesis is turned into a non-physical ideal form rather than the functional royal priestly vocation given to concrete physical human beings. The divine council rebellions of Eden, the Watchers, and Babel are reduced to a legal technicality and a divine sting operation. The cross itself becomes primarily a metabolic transfusion and a clever deception rather than the supreme act of covenantal obedience by which the Davidic Messiah bears the curse of the law and establishes the new covenant. Gregory of Nyssa's system remains an extraordinary achievement of speculative symmetry and an enduring testimony to the cosmic scope of divine love. Yet it also stands as a warning. When external philosophical systems, however brilliant, displace the organic, historical, non-supersessionist architecture of the Promise Plan, the canonical story itself is obscured. Ultimate soteriological coherence is found not by translating the gospel into Greek metaphysics, but by allowing the progressive covenantal narrative of Scripture to speak with its own transformative power.